Let's get into it. I'll share my presentation and we'll get up and running. So yeah, welcome everyone. I hope everyone is had a lovely month since I've talked to people. Yeah, tonight we are talking all about improving breathing when hiking uphill, which is obviously a massive factor a lot of people struggle with. It's a big deal that a lot of people kind of run into. So yeah, I kind of want to cover it a little bit today and give you some decent training advice which can make a bit of a difference in regards to this. So basically, we're going to be running for up until about 6:45 today. So as usual, I'll kind of zip through my presentation as quickly as possible. It is a little bit information heavy tonight, but it should be jam packed with some useful stuff for you, hopefully. As Sophie said, as we come through, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to just pop them in the group chat. And if everyone could also just pop themselves on mute as well, just in case any background stuff comes up. But with that being said, let's get into it. So breathing on ascents, steep uphills, who are hiking, we all know that can be not much fun for a lot of people. It's a big challenge that a lot of people will face on the trail. Basically, many people experience, sections like this, that situation where it's tough for everyone, but some people kind of find themselves like always getting really huffed and puffed on hills. And no matter what they do with their training, what they do with their preparations, how much hiking they do, they just, the second they hit a bit of a hill, they just get really huffed and puffed, which is obviously not much fun. A lot of people are in that stage where they just struggle to carry a conversation on the hills, and they're hiking along, having a good time with their friends or with their group. Then all of a sudden they're on the hills, they can't really keep that conversation up, they're huffing and puffing in between words. It can be not only really uncomfortable, but obviously we can get a bit self-conscious about it as well. I've been in that situation lots of times. It just really sucks. A lot of people just feel like their heart rate is just going through the roof, which again can feel pretty uncomfortable. And the tricky thing with this is once we do start getting a little bit like that, we start stressing out about that, makes it get even higher and makes it even worse. And it's just all in all just not much fun. Now, for a lot of people who are out there who maybe just live in the middle of the mountains or whatever it may be, and they have lots of elevation mountains to hike on, this may not be too much of an issue. They may be like, I know I struggle with this, but I can just go out and hike, week after week after week. I've got lots of mountains. I can kind of improve on this. But for a lot of people, maybe you don't have access to a huge amount of elevation. Maybe you don't go out hiking super regularly, or maybe no matter how much hiking you do, you notice this is a struggle. You may want to take this a little bit more seriously. And that's what we're going to be exploring today and diving into some practical and really sort of well structured advice, which can really help with this when you come down to it. Now, basically what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be covering sort of the typical approach in regards to this type of thing, breathing ascents when people are trying to train for this and why it may fall short for a lot of people. We're going to be covering some specific cardio training, cardio workouts you can do with helping with this, and a few simple breathing strategies. We won't be going over specific like exercises themselves or building out an entire training plan, because that's obviously a bit beyond. We'll be here for hours and hours and hours, but hopefully you'll get a good idea by the time we get to the end. Now, fair warning, all the presentations I've done so far, I think this is going to be a little bit information heavy because there is a lot of in there to just fill this out. So as you come through, if anything does feel a little bit like, oh, what's he talking about? How's that fit in? Sophie, do you mind just going through and just popping everyone on mute, if that's all right?
I can't see it. It's around my head.
And yeah, but hopefully by the end of the presentation, it should all make sense. So just bear with us as we come through. Now, coming down, typical approach to struggling on breathing up hills, like this is what everyone does. And, you'll say, hey, I struggle on up hills. I'll go on Google, go on Facebook, something like that. You say, hey, how do I improve this? And 90% of the recommendations will be, hey, go out and do HIIT, like high intensive interval training. There's so many people, like so many blogs, so many people in the hiking industry recommend it and this and that. And, it can work a little bit because logically you kind of think, okay, high intensity interval training is designed just to get us really out of breath. We work really hard and we get really out of breath. And by the end, we're pretty tired. Hiking up hills, getting out of breath, we're like, well, if we just get really out of breath in training, that will help us on the hills. And yeah, there is a bit of improvement here, but in all honesty, it's not the best approach. And in all honesty, you can get much better results with a huge amount of less effort if you follow a bit more of a structured approach, as opposed to going and doing like F45 or CrossFit 2 or 3 times a week where you absolutely flog yourself. So we're going to be exploring this a little bit more. Now, essentially, if we're getting a little bit technical, and we are getting technical today, but if we are looking at uphill hiking and we're like, hey, I want to improve my breathing, there's typically four big areas that if you can kind of cover in your training and put a bit of emphasis into, and you can cover all of these bases, it can make a pretty dramatic difference with this type of thing. Now, the four things we want to cover, and I'm going to explain all of these as we come through, is aerobic capacity, aerobic power, exposure to very high intensity, and some specific exposure. Now, none of that will make sense at this stage. They're just words, they're technical terms. Well, two of them are at least, but we're going to kind of get into it and break this down a little bit. So let's start with this aerobic capacity. Now, aerobic capacity, what it is basically the single most crucial aspect of fitness for any hiker to develop, not just for going up hills and breathing up hills, but for any type of hiking. And essentially what aerobic capacity is the aerobic energy system is the system in the body which produces energy while in the presence of oxygen. It basically uses oxygen as part of the process to produce energy. Now, this system is basically designed to provide us with lots and lots of energy over long periods of time. So when we're doing extended bouts of exercise, walking, running, swimming, there's long periods of time, this is pretty much what's fueling the majority of it. Now, basically, if we struggle with getting out of breath on up hills, training and developing this aerobic capacity, this aerobic energy system, and getting this as strong and as developed and as efficient as possible is really the first place you should look. Because the more we can develop this, the more efficient the body can be when we're going up the hills, and the less fatigue really comes out of it. So this is a really crucial aspect of fitness to improve. Now, basically, aerobic capacity, the way you train this and develop it is through long duration, low intensity exercise. So essentially anything you can really sustain for long, extended periods of time without getting super out of breath. So things like hiking, the simple one for hikers, walking, cycling, swimming, just things that you can just do for long periods of time. It's not stuff that you do and do for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm really tired now. But it's stuff that you can kind of do for 20, 30, 45, 60, or in hiking sense, multiple hours at a time. And that type of stuff as well. Now, it may seem a little bit backwards to focus on lower intensity exercise. If you're like, hey, I struggle getting out of breath, I feel really uncomfortable, I want to improve that. And then I'm sort of saying, hey, focus on lower intensity exercise. It may seem a little bit backwards, but trust me, it is 100% necessary. And the more we can develop this aerobic energy system, the more we can develop this aerobic capacity I'm talking about, the body will create certain adaptations in the body, which will be really beneficial. Things like more red blood cells, more hemoglobin, stuff that will actually produce oxygen, carry oxygen in the body. And it's basically, without getting too technical or too more technical, super necessary. Now, basically the general rule of thumb is the more we can develop this aspect of fitness, the quicker we can actually hike, and the more intense and more difficult hikes we can do while predominantly relying on this aerobic energy system. And the more we can rely on this aerobic energy system, the less fatigue we'll have, the less uncomfortable we'll have, and the more efficient we'll be able to go for longer periods of time. So really valuable. So when it comes down to this, the next question is, okay, long duration, low intensity exercise sounds pretty simple, and most of you are probably already doing this in one way or another leading into your trips. So the question is, how much should a hiker be doing this in their training if they're trying to improve their breathing on ascents? Now, it really comes down to a lot of factors. Obviously, everyone's an individual, everyone's got different trips, different needs, different situations. But as a general rule of thumb, if you are leading up to a trip and you can hike most weeks, doesn't have to be every single week, but let's say maybe 3 out of 4 weeks or something like that, you can probably get away with doing one of these sessions in a week on top of your hiking. So sort of like one session for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe 60 minutes of something like this in your week, and the rest of your week sort of focus on other areas if you're hiking pretty regularly. Now, if you can't quite hike that much, if you can only hike every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or even once a month, you probably want to be doing more of this, because this is kind of the thing that's going to be really beneficial to fill in those gaps of not being able to hike quite as much. So really depending on kind of how much you're hiking, you may want to fit this in. And again, this may not make total sense right now, but by the end of the presentation, I'll kind of break down what a week will look like with all of this and sort of break it down. Now, essentially, the key to this type of training, it's really simple. It's the most simple type of training you can be doing. Really, the key to it is basically just you want to gradually increase your volume, which is basically how much you do. So if you're, for example, doing, let's say, a really simple one is loaded pack walking. There's a really simple workout for hikers, very practical, very relevant. It could be as simple as, okay, I'm going to do this session once a week. Every single week I do it, I'm going to add an extra 5 minutes. So one week you do 40 minutes, then 45, then 50, then 55, literally that. It can be as simple as that. Or maybe a case of sort of doing, okay, I'm doing some cycling. I might add 10 minutes each week, or whatever it may be. That's really the simplest way. This type of training just responds to just doing a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Very, very basic, but it needs to be set. Now, there is occasionally when I talk about this type of thing, occasionally, for most people, this kind of makes sense. You're like, oh, this is pretty straightforward. But there's some people that come from an endurance sport background. So maybe in the past you've run marathons or you've done cycling events or something like that. And maybe you do have an endurance sport background. So if anyone in here is listening to this is for you. A lot of people may say, look, one session of this plus hiking is not really enough. And in all honesty, if you are an endurance athlete and you have a background in this type of stuff, it's not uncommon for people to do 4 to 5 sessions of this every single week for 2 hours at a time or whatever it may be. Endurance athletes, that is their sport. You can do this, but obviously for most hikers, it's not really practical. It's not realistic. Most people don't have all the time in the world to train and this and that. So if you are, have the time, you love it, you're a full-time athlete or whatever it may be, go right ahead. But for most hikers, we can kind of get away with doing just a little bit of this on top of our hiking. So that's the first thing, aerobic capacity training. Pretty basic, but it does need to be said. Now we kind of get into the bit slightly more interesting stuff. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is aerobic power, which is another aspect of training which targets this aerobic energy system. Now, essentially, the aerobic capacity that we were talking about before is our aerobic energy system, essentially the capacity of that just to go and go and go and go and go for super long periods of time. Now, essentially, aerobic power, it's still talking about that aerobic energy system, but essentially, this is talking about the highest intensity your body can sustain while still predominantly using this aerobic energy system, which is, I sound a little bit finicky, but it is pretty important. Essentially, the typical approach with HIIT training, which I was talking about before, we just go and just work really, really, really hard and this and that. It's great. It does lots of really, really good things. But what it is, because it's really short bursts of exercise, when you're doing like 30 seconds at a time or 45 seconds at a time or 20 seconds at a time, where you go stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, that stuff's typically working some of our other energy systems, which are called our anaerobic energy systems. You don't need to know too much about them, but just know that they're not super relevant for hiking. That type of training can help hikers, but the particular things that's developing isn't 100% relevant for hikers. If we can kind of shift that a little bit more to stuff that we're going to be using on the trail, which is this aerobic energy system, get a little bit more honed in on it, we can get way, way, way more benefits. So long story short, this aerobic power is just a way of interval training and a way of developing sort of slightly higher intensity exercise, which is a little bit more honed in towards the demands of hiking. Again, I'm sorry I'm getting a little bit technical today, but it is very, very valuable. Now, essentially, developing and training this specific thing called aerobic power can be really incredibly relevant for uphill hiking. It really has 2 big, big, big benefits. Number one, it can help you hike at higher intensities and speeds without getting out of breath. So the more we can develop this, the quicker we can go and the faster we can go without actually getting super out of breath. And it can also make us much more comfortable when we are out of breath. Because as I sort of said before, sometimes we get to this stage where it's kind of like and what do you call it, like a snowball effect in the sense we start off to get off a little bit out of breath. We get uncomfortable with that. We start to stress out. Then we get quicker and quicker and we stress more and quicker stress. And it ends up just sort of snowballing into this really bad situation. So essentially, if we can get a bit more comfortable with this, it can be really, really valuable. Now, aerobic power is best developed through some really, really specific interval training, which we'll just break down in a moment. It's very, very simple. Essentially, what you want to do for this type of training, you want to, find a stationary bike, an elliptical, a rower, a sled, a nice long set of stairs, or a nice long hill. Something where you can basically push relatively hard and you don't have to think too much. Some people can do this if they're running. Like if you've got a background in running, you can do this. Some people do this in other ways, but kind of we just want to think about stuff that's really, really simple, that has a very low risk of things going wrong, and basically you can work relatively hard. And essentially the way you do this, very, very simple, warm up, do whatever you want, 5 minutes, get a bit of blood moving around. And then essentially what you want to do is go very, 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 very quick for about 3 minutes. So put a timer on the clock, 3 minutes going quite quick, and really want to get quite out of breath. Then essentially once we've done the 3 minutes, we're going to rest for about 90 seconds. So complete rest, just recover, just focus on getting your breathing back under control and chill out. And then you're going to repeat that like 6 to 10 times. So if you're doing this in the gym or if you have a stationary bike at home, you literally sit on the bike, do 3 minutes really, really, really quick, chill out for 90 seconds, do that like 6 to 10 times, whatever it may be. And essentially what you're trying to do is just really, really, really push and challenge your breathing in those 3 minutes. Very simple. Now, if you're doing this on stairs or a long hill, it does take logistically a little bit more because obviously you've got to make sure you've got enough hill in front of you to do 3 minutes. And then obviously you've got 90 seconds to get down, but it does work out pretty well. Now, for this type of workout, it doesn't have to get much more complicated than that. And I would typically recommend if you're exploring this type of training, maybe doing it like once a week for maybe 4 to 8 weeks at a time. So essentially, somewhere in your week, you do this workout, take you like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that, just once a week for like 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how long you want to stick with it and how long until you get bored. And then each week you do it, just try to push a little bit quicker. Very, very simple, but super, super effective. Now, the next layer to this, so the aerobic capacity, the aerobic power, for 85% of people, if there are only two things you focus on in your training, and you stuck with that for like 6 to 8 weeks, 85% of people will see some really good success just from those two things. And if that's all you want to take out of this presentation, just making sure you're fitting in that lower intensity stuff, doing a little bit of overpower, it'll get a lot of people a long way. If you did try that, you're like, it's not quite getting me where I need to be, or you're like, you know what, actually, I want to really build up my week and just make sure I'm doing everything I can. The next layer to this is something called sprint training. So basically, sprint training is really any type of interval training. And interval training is just training where you go start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, where we basically go 100% intensity, so pretty much as quick as we can for a really short period. Now, this doesn't have to actually mean actually sprinting, like actually running, sprinting, because most people, that's not super. If we haven't done it for a while, it's probably going to get you hurt. It can be great if you can do it, but it doesn't have to be. But really, any type of cardio activity where you can go really, really, really all out. Now, while this type of training, when it comes down to it, it does have several benefits into, the more technical, what we call energy system development, which I was breaking down before in regards to different types of energy systems. Really, we don't have to get too technical with this type of thing. Really, the main benefit of this type of training for uphill hiking is simply exposing the body to these really, really high intensities. So this stuff that's probably higher intensity, probably more difficult than you will do on the hills, but just getting the body kind of exposed to that type of thing where you're really uncomfortable, which can translate into you just feeling a bit more comfortable on the trail. So this can physically and mentally just help you feel more comfortable when you're working harder. Now, with this type of thing, we don't have to get too technical in regards to this type of stuff. It's really just thinking, okay, what in the world can I do to just get myself in that state of where I'm pushing 100% in one way or another? And this can fall into that traditional hit I was talking about before. So if you do group exercise classes and you're like, once a week, I'm just going to absolutely push myself really, really hard, or whatever it may be, we can be a bit flexible with this. But this is kind of what we're thinking about. Sprint training, it's not medium intensity, it's not kind of high intensity, but it's really, 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 really high intensity. Now, an example workout of this, just to give you a little bit of context, again, we can be like, this could be a million different things you could do, but an example workout of this is maybe finding like a stationary bike, an elliptical, or a sled. Again, really anything where you can really push hard without really having to think or have a risk of things going wrong. For this type of workout, you probably do need a bit of like cardio equipment. Like realistically, if you're going up hills or you're walking, you're probably not going to be working hard enough. And again, sprinting, like running, some people can do it. It can be really good if you can do it, but a lot of people, it does have a risk of things going wrong. So typically, this is something you may need a bit of cardio equipment. If you have one lying around at home, if you have a gym access or whatever it may be, if you don't have access to any of this, you can probably forget about it. But really, really simple. This type of thing might be warming up, just getting yourself up and warm. You go really, 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 really quick for 30 seconds, rest for 30 seconds, repeat that 10 times. That'll take you 10 minutes. You'll work really, really hard, but it's going to be a really, really solid workout. And that can be quite effective for this type of thing. Now, for this particular type of workout, you might just do this once a week. You don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to spend ages and ages and ages doing this type of thing. It literally can just be like a standalone session. So you can literally just warm up, do 10 minutes of this, and then you're done. You're like, hey, I've worked out for the day. Fantastic. Or you may do this at the end of a strength session if you're doing strength training, which can be really, really good for hiking. You can just do this at the end. There's 10 minutes on top of your workout. Or you can even do this at the beginning of another cardio session. So as I was saying before, aerobic capacity stuff, your walking sessions, your cycling, your swimming, whatever it may be. You could even do 10 minutes of this at the very, very start, going really, really, really hard, and then just do the rest of your session for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes of just that lower intensity stuff. And that way you can actually combine the two workouts and it works out pretty well. For me, the way I like to sort of put this into my week is I typically like to alternate between doing what we call training phases of this and the aerobic power intervals I did before. And I'll explain how this all comes together in a little bit more detail in a bit. But basically what that means is you might do 4 weeks of the sprint training, then 4 weeks of the aerobic power training, then 4, and 4, and 4, and 4. And you can kind of keep on alternating between those two for as long as you want. And it'll still be really effective for a long, long time. Now, the fourth thing we want to cover now. So we talked about aerobic capacity, aerobic power, sprint training, three big things. Next thing we want to talk about is this specific training. So ultimately, if we do struggle with breathing going up hills, we probably do want to practice this specific thing in our training. This will help prepare the body and mind for the very, very specific challenge you're going to face. So how the body actually moves, how you actually get up the hills, how you propel yourself. This is what we want to practice. Now, this is really, really simple. Basically what you want to do is just find a set of stairs or a hill locally. If you don't have any access to that, you can use like a Stairmaster or a stepper at a gym. If you don't have access to those, you could even do like box step ups, find a little aerobic step or a bench in the park and just step up and down. You would set a timer for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes or something like that. And you literally just climb up and down for however long you want to do the workout for. Very, very, very simple, but we want to get some specific exposure to this type of thing. Now, that's the very, very basics of that workout. But beyond just practicing this and just doing a really, really basic version of this, which will get you a lot of benefits, but we can upgrade this a little bit more and we can hone on this a little bit more from just doing something really, really simple. And essentially, we can look at this in two different ways, which can be very, very beneficial. Number one, we can use these types of specific training sessions to practice pacing. So one of the biggest things that hold people back with breathing up hills, particularly when they're trying to develop this and train this, is they'll train and train and train and train. They'll dramatically improve their fitness, improve their capabilities, but they'll just keep on going out on the trail and they'll just keep on getting out of breath no matter how much they're training. And one of the things that holds a lot of people back is they just don't know how to pace themselves. And they don't actually know, like, as they're getting fitter, they just end up going quicker and quicker and quicker. So essentially using these sessions to actually practice yourself keeping things a little bit more under control, keeping it at a pace where you actually don't get out of breath, and using this to actually practice and develop this skill can be really, really useful. So one thing I'll often get some of my hikers to do is I'll get them to do these sessions, and I'll say for the entire session, I just want you to stick to a pace where you can constantly breathe in and out through your nose. Now, that's really, really simple, but it can be a very, very effective way of just managing that pacing, just teaching you to kind of maintain a steady speed can be really, really useful. Now, on the flip side of this, you might say, you know what, actually, I don't want to do the pacing. I don't want to be a low intensity workout. I kind of want to use this as a higher intensity workout. So you may use this as one of those aerobic power interval sessions. You may say, look, I'm going to climb really, really quick for 3 minutes and rest for 90 seconds and do that. So again, we're combining the two things. So we don't have to spend a whole life training, but we can kind of sort of work out that. So you can just ask yourself, what do I want to get out of this session? How do I want to sort of hone in on this? And you can choose one of those two things. There's lots of other ways of mixing that up, but that's two really, really simple. Now, to dive into the pacing stuff a little bit more, we talked about those four sort of areas of training. The pacing stuff, as I said before, it can be really, really, really beneficial just to practice and develop this. Because if you don't learn to do this, and no matter how fit you get, you will still get out of breath, which is a little bit, unfortunate. So basically, as I sort of said before, if you are not pacing yourself and you're just pushing quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker, and you're always at that stage, we are going to be pushing out of that aerobic energy system that I was talking about before, which is what we want to be using, which is really, really efficient. And we'll be working at an intensity where we predominantly will be using that anaerobic energy systems, which is basically our high intensity energy systems, which just get us tired a little bit quicker, which we don't really want. So what tends to happen is if we just practice this quick and quick and quick and quick all the time, you'll just get used to this and you'll get used to relying on these higher intensity energy systems, working at these quicker paces, and it'll just become normal. And it'll just be what you do every single time, which isn't the end of the world, but if you want to improve this, there is a better way. And basically, as I sort of said before, people will happen to improve their fitness, but they'll always be out of breath because they never really change things. So practicing this, really, really, really valuable. So a few other ways to kind of practice this type of pacing beyond that sort of hill stair session I was talking before. Simple place to sort of look at is just basically when you're out on the trail and when you're actually doing your hiking. When you're climbing up a hill on the trail, just try to stick to breathing in that nose breathing pace, breathing in and out through your nose. Now, you might be asking, okay, why, Rowan, are you saying to do this? A couple of reasons. Nose breathing itself can be a slightly more efficient method of breathing. You'll see a lot of stuff online where people are like, hey, this is the best thing in the world. Everyone has to be doing this. You're crazy if you breathe out your mouth and all of this. It doesn't matter that much. It is a little bit more efficient, can be beneficial, but, if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world. But the more important reason is basically nose breathing as a rate limiter. And essentially, if you are breathing in and out through your nose, you are likely going at a pace where you can predominantly just using that aerobic energy system. So you can be pretty confident that I'm walking at a pace which is really efficient, which I can sustain for a long period of time. It's not going to have a huge amount of fatigue. Alternatively, if you're working at a pace where you can't sustain that, fatigue's probably going to creep up a little bit quicker. It's really, really simple, but that's kind of the way I look at it. Now, essentially, if we can stick to this nose breathing pace, when we're doing the hills or whatever it may be, this will allow us to train and develop that aerobic capacity, which we were talking about before, and will also just ensure we're moving at an efficient pace. So pretty bang for your buck and pretty beneficial. Now, the tricky thing with this type of thing when we talk about nose breathing is the first time you try it, it'll seem really, really uncomfortable to sustain, particularly on the hills. If you already struggle with breathing on the hills, this will feel really almost impossible. And you will absolutely, the first few times you do this, have to significantly reduce the amount and the pace you're doing when you're going up the hills. And for some people, it may be excruciatingly slow, and it may just be a snail's pace climbing. Or some people, it may be 10 steps and they're like, oh, I can't really control it anymore, so I'm just going to stop. Get the breathing under control, 10 steps, stop. And it may be excruciatingly slow at first. But if you can practice this and develop this and train this, it's one of the best things you can do to help with this type of thing. And it will get better and better week by week by week by week. And it will allow you to go faster and faster and faster while still sticking with this, which is in the end is going to be really beneficial. So basically, you can practice this during your aerobic capacity sessions, so your walking sessions, your hiking sessions, your cycling, any of that sort of low steady state stuff. This is probably the easiest stuff to do. You can do it during your hikes on the sort of easy sections at first, like when you're just on the flat. Then you can try it on the ascents and try it doing your stair and hill sessions, which will be a little bit harder, and just sort of filter it in here and there. You don't have to get obsessive about it. It's not the end of the world if you get out of it, but the more you can practice this, the more beneficial it's going to be. Now, one thing I will say is when you are looking at those other sessions we talked about before, those kind of higher intensity sessions, those aerobic power intervals, those sprint sessions, don't think about this. Just breathe however you want. But those sessions, we don't want to be limited by our pace. We want to push really, really quick. So just breathe however you want. So don't worry about this there. Yeah. Now, the final thing I'll sort of say on this is some people will be like, okay, this is cool, but for one reason or another, I can't breathe through my nose. Maybe you've got a smaller nasal passage. Maybe you've got something going on, whatever it may be. If that's for you, don't obsess on the nose breathing. Basically, what you want to think about instead of nose breathing is walking at a pace where you can comfortably carry a conversation without getting huffed and puffed and out of breath. So anytime you kind of see, hey, Rowan's just said nose breathing here, just think of going on a pace where you can comfortably carry a conversation. It kind of lines up with pretty similar thing. So for one reason or another, you can't use nose breathing, that's your other option there. Now, obviously, that's a lot of information. I know it was a little bit technical and a little bit, a little bit of stuff there. So you may be like, okay, well, how does this all make sense? How does this all come together? So I want to explain how this sort of will look in your week, just to make it really, really simple after we go into all of that. Essentially, as a training plan, if you're like, hey, I struggle on breathing on ascents, and this is something I really want to work on. Number one, we just want to hike where we can. We've done other presentations where I've broken down, coming up with a hiking plan and coming up with a long-term plan. So, have a look at them if you haven't already. But basically, we just want to think about hiking as much as we can. If we can hike every week, great. We can hike every 3 times a month, great. Every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever it may be. Whatever you realistically can do, fit that in. Now, during the hiking, try to stick to that nose breathing pace as much as you can. Realistically, don't have to get obsessive about it, but the more you can do it, the better. And initially on the hiking, you will need to reduce your pace on uphills. To stick with that can be tricky if you're with other people, if you're with a group and whatever it may be. So see how you go there. If you are with a group, you can either say to them, hey, I'm actually trying to practice and train something. Can you just bear with me? I'm going to be really slow up the hill. I'll meet you at the top. That may go well. Or alternatively, you might be like, you know what? That's not going to work. These people are not going to wait for me, or I feel very self-conscious. If that's the situation, then just do whatever you need to do on your group hikes and practice this on your own time. Let's see how you go there. Now, that's your hiking. Now, depending on how much hiking you're doing, then we kind of want to aim for 1 to 2 of these aerobic capacity workouts in a week, anywhere from 20 minutes to 90 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how much time you have. If you do have loads of time in your week, you can do more than this. You can do more than 1 to 2, but for most of my hikers, I don't really get them doing too much more. And this might just be something like a loaded pack session, a stair and hill climbing session, cycling, swimming, any of that lower intensity stuff. 1 to 2 of those in a week. And then in your week, we can either aim for one of those aerobic power interval sessions or one of those sprint interval sessions. So you'll end up doing one or the other. For me, I like to alternate between the two every 4 weeks or so. So I'll do 4 weeks of aerobic power, 4 weeks of sprints, alternate. Ultimately, what that looks like is we've got our hiking as much as we can, 1 to 2 of the aerobic capacity sessions, and then one of those other ones as well, which ends up being like 3 to 4, well, 2 to 3 sessions in a week plus your hiking, which should be relatively decent for most people. I'm not giving specific minutes per time. Like some people will be able to fit in 60-minute sessions for these things, fine. Some people are only going to do 30 minutes, 20 minutes. You got to ask yourself what's realistic, what's practical here, and just go with that. So just checking the time, making sure I was on track. And then basically looking at the rest of your week, if you're like, hey, I want to train more times in the week, then the other areas of the week you want to focus on other aspects of fitness. So for example, strength training, really beneficial for hikers. We talked about quite a bit on other presentations and this and that, and this and that. Everyone obviously is going to be different, have different schedules, needs, preferences. So this is a bit of a rough guide. But if you can cover these things and you can stick with it for like 4 to 8 weeks of solid, consistent training and work relatively hard on the hard sessions, work quite easy on the easy sessions, it can make a really, really big difference with this uphill hiking. Now, a few other bits and pieces just to cover this, finish this topic off. So we talked about the actual training here and there. A few other bits and pieces. Strength training, as we mentioned briefly, very, very valuable for hikers. When it comes down to ascents, it will play a big role in helping this make it get a bit easier because basically the more capacity your legs have going uphill, the more effort the less effort they use, the less oxygen they use, meaning your oxygen go to other areas. So strength training can play a pretty big role. Nutrition, hydration will play a massive difference in your energy and fatigue levels as well, and will play a big role on this. So we did a presentation, I think 2 or 3 months ago on minimizing fatigue on the trail, which we went into this in a bit of detail. So if you haven't seen that one, check that one out. Trekking poles can typically make a pretty big difference on this as well. So I'm a big advocate for trekking poles, absolutely love them for hikers, specifically when we're looking on breathing ascents. There has been, some studies that have shown that trekking poles on uphills can reduce what's called our rate of perceived exertion, meaning things just feel a little bit more comfortable. Not everyone loves them, but can be pretty beneficial here. And then basically, if you sort of were like, hey, you know what, put this stuff into action. I've got a trip coming up in 3 months, 6 months time or something like that. I've done this stuff for like 2-3 months. It hasn't really made any difference. Probably will, but if it hasn't, it does happen for some people. The next step you may explore is something called respiratory muscle training, which is essentially, we talked about strength training for your muscles. Respiratory muscle training is something that's called strength training for your breathing muscles. 95% of people, 98% of people probably don't need to do this, but if you're aware that for one reason or another you have breathing limitations, like actually you're being told that, this may be something you want to look into. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it can be a relatively beneficial thing. But if anyone's interested in that, you can flick me an email. I can share a podcast I've done on the subject, which dives into it a little bit more. So, a lot of information today, I know, and I know it was a little bit more whatever you call it, than the usual one. Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully if we can just break it down like this, very, very straightforward. Aerobic capacity, either aerobic power or that's interval training, a little bit of, practicing and pacing and focus on your other training, it can go a really long way. For this type of stuff, if we just do put a little bit of thought, a little bit of structure, a little bit of planning behind this, and we actually come in with intention of going, okay, our training is trying to actually attack certain aspects of fitness, which are going to help me on the hills, it can be much, much, much more effective than you just sort of saying, hey, I'm just going to work really hard, do a bunch of HIIT, do a bunch of hiking, kind of hope for the best. So hopefully that does help. But if anything that doesn't make sense, you're more welcome to message me and let me know. Now, hopefully that does give you a bit of an overview. As always, to wrap this presentation up, I'll just do a quick little pitch about what I do. If you did, going through this, you've got a trip coming up with Camino Women or anyone else, you did want a little bit of help putting this all together, or maybe a bit of help with your training leading into your trip, or getting on top of an ache of pain, or whatever it may be, I would love to chat with you. Now, through Summit Strength, which is my online personal training business for hikers, we offer a personalized training program for hikers to help them get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. Now, typically what our package includes is a custom and personalized workout program to help you get ready for anything the trail may throw at you. So covering things like strength training, cardio training, hiking training, recovery mobility, making sure it's all personalized around you, your life, your situation, your needs, and your goals. We also do put a big emphasis into educating you on all the peripheral factors which can make or break an adventure. So things like nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, pain prevention, a bunch of other things. And also we give you the coaching, support, and accountability to keep you on track. So make sure you do have someone in your corner to answer questions, make sure you start sticking with stuff, and making sure you're getting the best out of everything. Now, if that did sound like you and you were interested in just finding a little bit more and seeing if and how this training may be right for you, essentially what you can do, you can go to our website, summitstrength.com.au/Camino Women, and you can basically, on there, you can book a quick call with our team. Just a quick little 15-minute call. We can have a little bit of chat, just learn a bit about your situation, and ultimately just see if and how we may be able to help you. And if it does sound like something we may be able to help you with, we can book you on a little bit more deeper call. We can really get in the nitty-gritty of your situation, and find out exactly how we can help and talk you through our training and all of that. So if you did want to have a quick chat, absolutely free, no pressure environment, you can go to summitstrength.com.au/Camino Women. And just one little final thing before I get into the Q&A section. Got a special little offer at the moment. If you follow my socials at all, you may see this week we're doing a bit of a push for enrollment as we're coming towards the tail end of the year. We're doing a bit of a push towards enrollment. So I've got a little special offer for Camino Women only. This isn't going on anyone else, so it's only a part of Camino Women. If you do sign up within the next 2 weeks, so if you hopped on the call, we had those chats, and you were like, you know what, actually, I wouldn't mind getting a bit of help and decide to sign on one of our packages, we'll basically just throw on top of whatever package you decide's right for you an extra 2 weeks of training free on top of whatever you may sign up on. Now, this offer is only available for those who sign up by the end of Friday, the 20th of September. So it's only a 2-week thing. It's not going to be there forever. So if you were interested, just go through that link, book a quick little call with our team, have a little bit of a chat, and take it from there. So hopefully you're all still with me here, and hopefully that wasn't too dense. Oh, thanks, Leanne. I didn't realize you were on the call. There we go. So thanks for the shout out, Leanne. And yeah, if anyone does have any questions from all that, throw it in the Q&A, and we've got a few minutes to carry over. So if you have any questions of what we've covered today, or anything else really in regards to your training for hiking, yeah, now's your time, fire away. And then yeah, Jude, naturally walk fast and need to try and slow down to reduce strain in the knees. And yeah, ultimately the nose breathing, as I sort of said, Jude, it's just literally it can be a rate limiter. So particularly when it comes to aches and pains, knees, feet, shins, hips, one of the most simple things we can kind of do to reduce aches and pains on the trail is just reduce our speed a little bit. And for our naturally fast hikers, particularly when we're on the natural on the trail, on the flat sections and we power much away. If we already get aches and pains, just pulling the pace back a little bit can actually help quite a bit. Obviously, it's easier said than done. You have to remind yourself in all of this, but it can go a long way. So yeah, hopefully that helps as well. Any other questions while we're here, guys? Too easy. Well, I think that if there's no other questions, I think that might do us for tonight, and I'm going to go get a bit of dinner. So I'm just having a look. Oh yeah, actually, there we go. So next month's presentation, I'm sure Sophie and the girls will do a shout out. I think we are talking about preventing knee pain while hiking. I'm going to go into that in a little bit of detail. So I'll be back in action from next month as well. And Anita, oh, cool. So Anita's actually tries the nose breathing. She gets my emails, and she's seen a big difference with that already. So fantastic. That's awesome. So yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you as always for having me on board, everyone. I really do appreciate you, getting me a part of this because I love what you do with Camino Women. I love all the trips you guys are going off, and I love being able to help in my small way with all of this. So thank you so much for having me on. I hope everyone has a lovely, lovely rest of your evening, a lovely month, and we'll talk to you all very, very soon.
Thanks, Rowan. See you guys. Thank you.